In 1879, circus performer Commodore Nutt finally found love again after years of heartbreak. But soon after the wedding, doctors made a chilling discovery. Many people try to hide the ways they're different, but in the case of Commodore Nutt, hiding his unique appearance was impossible. It made for a dramatic life of both fame and failure. Born in New Hampshire in the late 1840s, George Washington Morrison Nutt grew up in a fairly wealthy family. Not only did his father own lucrative farms, but he also served in prestigious roles, including time as a city marshal. With his parents and 4 brothers and sisters, he wanted for nothing. Well, almost nothing. Nutt was born with dwarfism. His full height ended up at about 2.5 feet. Even with his economic advantage, this likely caused him some discomfort. His ultimate response, though, set him on the path to stardom. While it isn't exactly clear when he made his debut, most reports state that Nutt began his career in entertainment in his early teens. Like many people with quote-unquote unusual genetics during that period of history, he found his place as a member of a travelling circus. His potential for entertaining seemed evident, so evident that he became easy to take advantage of. Somehow he found himself under the management of a woman named Lily. Reports on her connection to the circus are meagre, but she allegedly charged just 5 cents for a look at Nutt. Even worse, she marketed him as a boy with no education. Luckily for Nutt, an unexpected saviour soon spotted him and ultimately changed his life forever. P.T. Barnum, famous American entertainer and founder of Barnum and Bailey Circus, first laid eyes on Nutt in 1861. He felt immediately that something was off. According to Barnum, Nutt's manager didn't have a clue as to the diamond in the rough that she managed. In fact, Barnum found a young man shockingly different than publicised. In later notes, Barnum greatly praised the Nutt he first made acquaintance with. He called him a most remarkable dwarf, taking notice of both his intelligence and how perfectly handsome and fit he appeared. In short, Barnum saw dollar signs. Getting Nutt to work with him, however, didn't come easy. Barnum needed to get past Nutt's current manager to have a chance at him. In the end, though, he didn't go through the manager at all. He sent his lawyer to Nutt's parents with a huge down payment to convince them to get their son to work for him. But remember, Nutt's parents weren't short on money. They needed more to close the deal. In addition to the payment to his parents and a fair wage for Nutt, Barnum committed to full care of the young man during the time of the contract. In essence, he obligated himself to take over for Nutt's parents, ensuring their son's education, health, and accommodation. Thus began Nutt's time at Barnum's American Museum in New York City. Barnum completely transformed his image, starting by giving him the name Commodore Nutt. His entire act revolved around this character. He dressed in uniforms made to make him look like a small Navy general, but his clothes only served as a tiny part of the act. Nutt received a small carriage to go with his general uniform. Barnum ordered the carriage fashioned to look like a walnut. Nutt's only sibling with dwarfism, his brother Rodney Jr., completed the look as the coachman driving the Shetland ponies that moved the carriage. If that sounds like a must-see to you, then you can probably imagine the success of his debut. Audiences just adored watching Commodore Nutt on display. People flocked to the museum to see him and found themselves equally delighted when he visited town in his nut-shaped carriage. Nutt was raking in the profit, but one issue started to interrupt this wild success, and Barnum should have seen it coming. The public knew Barnum as a bit of a trickster. He built part of his fame on elaborate hoaxes, including claims of displaying a woman over 150 years old and a real-life mermaid. In the case of Nutt, though, the audiences seemed to have more than enough evidence to seriously question his authenticity. Nutt didn't serve as the only dwarf in Barnum's museum. General Tom Thumb already entertained there for some time before he showed up. As such, people accused Barnum of trying to simply repackage Tom Thumb as a different character. Barnum felt pressed to prove that his new attraction was indeed a new attraction. Even though he'd sent General Tom Thumb on tour, he brought him back to New York to prove the naysayers wrong. This ended up being a thorn in Nutt's side. Even with the two dwarfs side by side, some still called it some type of trick. That's despite Tom Thumb's older age and larger girth. Less than a year after his big debut, President Abraham Lincoln invited both Nutt and Barnum to the White House for a special visit. The president was so eager to see them that he even walked out on a cabinet meeting upon their arrival. Priorities, Abe. Nutt's Achilles heel arrived on the scene that same year, in the form of another dwarf, Lavinia Warren. After her time working as a teacher in Massachusetts, Barnum discovered her and hired her to join his Museum of Attractions. Although there's no detailed report on their first meeting, whatever took place left a huge impression on Nutt. He fell completely in love with Warren and made it known. Unfortunately for him, she very reasonably considered his 15 or so years no match for her very adult 23. She found the boy much harder to convince. Warren also caught the eye of Tom Thumb, who, upon meeting her, went to Barnum the very same day, proclaiming he was in love with her. Thumb didn't just tell Barnum to get his amorous feelings off his chest, he harboured a plan of action. In essence, he wanted Barnum to be his wingman, helping him to get with and ultimately marry Warren. You'd think a boss would stay out of his employees' affairs, especially love affairs, but Barnum did the exact opposite. While Thumb confessed his feelings, Barnum saw those dollar signs again. He envisioned a moneymaker right away, a dwarf wedding he could play up and charge admission for. Barnum took his wingman duties seriously, encouraging Warren to truly consider Thumb's advances. Nutt refused to take things lying down. In fact, he resorted to getting physical with Thumb. He tracked him down while they were both on the job at the museum and fully attacked him. Barnum went a step further in his wingman work, inviting Warren, Thumb and Thumb's mother to his home for a weekend. Thumb proposed to Warren during that weekend at Barnum's home, and she accepted. Nutt likely felt totally burned, and in more ways than one, but his boss added insult to his already deep emotional injury. Barnum ramped up the ante when he asked Nutt to be Thumb's best man at the ceremony. It all played into his huge money-making plan for publicity. Nutt all out refused Barnum's request. Furthermore, he took personal offence to both Barnum and Thumb's involvement in the whole affair. On one hand, it's understandable, as he worked closely with both men. On the other hand, it seemed Warren never looked at him romantically anyway. Perhaps that fact prompted his eventual change of heart. After his first refusal, Thumb himself approached Nutt to ask him to be his best man. Despite the entire situation, it's likely they experienced some sort of friendship as people who shared a unique way of life. Either way, Nutt finally accepted and decided to play his part in the affair. And what a grand affair it turned out to be. Barnum advertised the union of Thumb and Warren as a fairy wedding. Nutt filled his role as best man, and Warren's sister Minnie served as the maid of honour. As Barnum expected, the event drew huge crowds to both the church they married at and the elaborate reception. But all the fanfare didn't sit well with everyone. The actual members of the church that hosted the wedding felt jilted by the event. With the huge crowds it drew, their usual seats got taken up by people who wouldn't be there otherwise. Controversy aside though, Barnum's plan went off without a hitch. Still focused on what could benefit himself in the long run, Barnum encouraged Nutt to date Warren's sister. Not only did he refuse, he claimed himself done with romance altogether. Interest in the four small entertainers peaked after the Ferry wedding. Barnum capitalised on this spike by sending the entire group on a lengthy world tour, branding them the Tom Thumb Company. Nutt likely didn't find it easy to travel the world with his lost love and the man who took her, but perhaps the other major benefits soothed him. The four toured from 1869 to 1872, and during their travels they made hundreds of stops and gave over 1,000 performances. By the time they returned to America, both they and Barnum held far more wealth than they likely expected. However, once back at home, things didn't go nearly as smoothly. Nutt just couldn't take it anymore. Shortly after his return, he entirely fell out with Barnum. While there's not much reported as to what the final nail in the coffin turned out to be, it's easy to find several reasons for Nutt to argue with his sketchy boss. In his view, it likely seemed that Barnum manipulated him out of the love of his life. Sadly, things didn't get any easier once he went solo. At first, Nutt tried to continue his work in the entertainment business. He launched a variety show with his brother Rodney Jr., but he couldn't get it off the ground. After failing to run a successful show in either Oregon nor California, he tried to turn his attention to something entirely different. Done with the stage, Nutt ventured into small business. He bought saloons in multiple states, deciding to try his hand at running them. But owning a business is rather different than being a performer and requires a very different set of skills. Perhaps that explains one major business mess-up that cost him more than he bargained for. While trying to get his saloon in New York City off the ground, authorities caught Nutt selling alcohol without a proper permit. They shut him down right away, bringing an end to that particular business venture. Perhaps tired of working at things he felt inexperienced with, he took a quick turn back to the life he knew best. Nutt returned to entertainment with a run at Rockaway Pier, starring in a show entitled Tally Ho. Despite his short break from entertainment, it's quite likely that fans still sought him out and enjoyed the chance to see him perform. But even with a return to his career comfort zone, he still had a ruined love life to sort out. Regardless of Nutt's declarations against love, the press continued to have a field day with their ideas about his love life. They married him off to Warren's sister Minnie several times in their gossip articles. Nutt remained good friends with his first love's sister, but they never became more. Eventually, though, he gave up his bachelor promises. He finally gave love a try again in the late 1870s. Although the details of their relationship are scarce, he reportedly married one Lillian Elston in 1879. Much to Barnum's disappointment, she turned out not to be a dwarf. Tragically enough, after waiting so long to find love, he didn't truly get much time to enjoy it. Just about 2 years after his marriage, Nutt fell seriously ill. Doctors diagnosed him with liver disease and he struggled to get well for months. Ultimately, he succumbed to the sickness in May 1881. While his wife wept over his grave and he received a fair funeral, his burial ended up being a lot less notable than he deserved. Nutt managed to turn his disadvantage into a life of success. Even so, he somehow ended up buried under an unmarked grave. His story, however, lives on, in videos like this, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe for more videos.